The scream tore through the trees, before Mira even saw what caused it. She dropped her basket of herbs and ran toward the sound, her boots sinking into wet mud, branches slapping against her arms. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. Someone was hurt. Someone was dying. She was sure of it. When she pushed through the last wall of bushes, she stopped cold. It was not a person. A massive black wolf lay on its side in a shallow ditch, one back leg twisted inside a rusted metal snare. Blood soaked the fur around the wound, dark and glistening in the dim afternoon light. The animal's chest rose and fell in short, desperate breaths. Its eyes, a strange pale gold, locked onto hers the moment she appeared. Mira froze. Every story she had ever heard about the forbidden woods rushed into her mind at once. Villagers who wandered too far and never came back. Strange howls at night that were not quite animal and not quite human. Elders who warned children never to cross the old stone markers at the edge of the forest. She had crossed them anyway, chasing a rare blue moss that only grew past the boundary, the kind that could bring a fair price at the healer's shop. Now she was standing 3 steps away from a wolf twice the size of any she had ever seen, and it was watching her the way a person watches someone they are about to judge. She should run. Every instinct told her to run. But the wolf whimpered, a low, broken sound, and its enormous body trembled from pain, and something in Mira's chest twisted painfully in response. She had spent her whole life patching up broken wings, torn paws, sick children, and old men with coughs that would not quit. She did not know how to look at suffering and simply walk away from it, even when the suffering belonged to something that could kill her in a single bite. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than to the wolf. "Okay, okay, okay." She took a slow step forward. The wolf's lips curled back, showing teeth the length of her fingers. A low growl rattled from deep in its chest. "I know," Mira said quietly, lifting both hands. "I know I look like trouble right now. I promise I am not." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. It did not attack. It did not move at all, except for the shaking that would not stop. Mira crouched down, keeping a careful distance, and studied the snare. It was an old poacher's trap, the kind outlawed years ago, but still used by men who did not care about outlaws or rules. The metal teeth had bitten deep into the wolf's leg, and with every small movement the animal made, the wire only tightened further. If she did nothing, the wolf would bleed out before nightfall. If she tried to help and failed, she might lose a hand, or worse. She thought of her mother, gone 3 winters now, who used to say that fear was not a reason to stop, only a reason to be careful. Mira swallowed hard, and reached for the small knife she kept in her satchel, the one she used to cut roots and bandages. "I am going to try to get this off you," she said, speaking slowly, softly, the same way she spoke to frightened patients. "I need you to trust me for just a few minutes. I know that is a strange thing to ask a wild wolf. I am asking anyway." The wolf's gold eyes never left her face. She inched closer, and closer again, until she was near enough to smell the coppery scent of blood and see the fine, silver-tipped fur along the wolf's spine. Up close, the animal looked even bigger, its paws larger than her own hands, its jaw powerful enough to crush stone. And yet, when she reached toward the snare, the wolf did not snap at her. It only watched, breathing hard, muscles tense as a drawn bowstring. Her first attempt to loosen the wire only made things worse. Her fingers slipped, the metal bit deeper, and the wolf let out a pained yelp that made her flinch back in horror. "Sorry, I am so sorry," she gasped, hands shaking now too. "I am not very good at this. I usually work on smaller creatures, rabbits, birds, things that do not have teeth like yours." She forced herself to breathe, to slow down, to think the way she had been trained to think when panic threatened to take over. She examined the mechanism more carefully this time, tracing the wire back to the spring that held it locked in place. There, if she could press down on the small lever near the base while pulling the wire outward at the same time, it might release without tightening further. It would mean putting both hands directly beside the wolf's open wound, close enough for the animal to end her life with one snap of its jaw. "Please do not eat me," she muttered, and pressed down. The wolf snarled, sudden and sharp, and Mira yanked her hands back instinctively. Its teeth closed on empty air just beside her wrist, missing her skin by less than an inch. Her whole body went cold with the shock of how close it had come. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Mira's heart slammed against her ribs. The wolf's chest heaved, its golden eyes wide and wild. Then, strangely, the wolf lowered its head back down to the dirt. It looked at her again, and this time, there was something else beneath the pain and fear in its gaze. Something almost like an apology. "We are both scared," Mira said shakily. "That makes two of us. Let us try this again, and maybe try not to bite me this time." She reached forward once more, hands trembling but steady enough. This time she moved faster, more decisive, pressing the lever and pulling in one smooth motion, the way she had planned. The wire sprang loose with a metallic snap, and the wolf's leg came free. The animal let out a long breath, almost like relief, and its body sagged against the ground. Mira did not waste the moment celebrating. She had seen enough injuries to know that freeing the leg was only the first step. The wound itself was deep, torn open along the muscle, and already crawling with dirt from the forest floor. Left untreated, it would fester within a day. "Do not move," she told the wolf, as if it could understand her, and reached into her satchel for the bundle of herbs she always carried. Crushed yarrow, to stop the bleeding. A paste of comfrey root to help it knit closed. Strips of clean cloth she had meant to use for something else entirely. The wolf watched every movement of her hands with sharp, intelligent focus, and Mira found herself talking the entire time, filling the silence, because the silence made the danger feel too real. "My name is Mira, by the way. I do not know why I am telling a wolf my name, but it feels rude not to introduce myself when I am about to touch your leg." She pressed the yarrow paste gently against the wound, and the wolf flinched, but did not pull away. "I am an apprentice to the village healer. Well, I say apprentice. Mostly I fetch herbs, and get yelled at for mixing up the wrong roots. But I do know how to stop bleeding, at least." She wrapped the cloth carefully around the wound, tight enough to hold pressure, but loose enough not to cut off blood to the leg. The wolf's ragged breathing slowly steadied as she worked, and by the time she finished, the golden eyes had softened into something closer to exhaustion than fear. "There," Mira said, sitting back on her heels, wiping her bloodied hands on her skirt. "That is the best I can do out here. You should rest. You lost a lot of blood, and that wound needs time." The wolf did not run. It did not even try to stand. It simply lay there, watching her, its massive head resting on the cool earth, as the last of the daylight began to fade through the canopy above them. Mira glanced toward the sky, and realized with a jolt how late it had become. If she did not start walking now, she would be caught in the forest after dark, and after dark was when the stories about these woods stopped being simple warnings, and started feeling like something closer to truth. "I have to go," she said, feeling an odd pang of guilt at leaving an injured animal alone in the dirt, even though every rational part of her mind screamed that this was exactly what she should be doing. "You should be able to move again soon. Find somewhere safe, somewhere with water." She stood, brushing dirt and blood from her knees, and took one last look at the wolf before turning to leave. Its gold eyes tracked her every step, unblinking, and for a strange, fleeting moment, Mira could have sworn there was something almost human in the way it watched her go. She told herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. She was wrong. The walk home felt longer than usual, every shadow between the trees seeming to shift and stretch as the light disappeared. Mira kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see the wolf following, half hoping that it was not. By the time she reached the wooden fence marking the edge of the village, her legs ached, and her hands were still faintly stained with dried blood, despite her best efforts to rub them clean on damp leaves along the way. Her small cottage sat near the edge of the village, close enough to the tree line that her neighbors often joked she lived halfway between two worlds. Tonight, that joke felt less funny than usual. She pushed open her door, lit a single candle, and sank into the chair by her cold hearth, letting the events of the day finally catch up to her. Her hands would not stop shaking. She had touched a wild wolf. She had held its wounded leg in her bare hands and lived to tell the story, though she doubted anyone in the village would believe her if she tried. She decided, almost immediately, that she would not tell anyone. Not her mentor, old Agatha, who ran the healer's shop and had a habit of scolding first and asking questions later. Not her neighbors, who already thought her strange for wandering into the woods so often in search of rare herbs. Certainly not the village elders, who would likely forbid her from ever setting foot near the tree line again. This would simply be her secret, a wild, impossible thing that happened once, and would never happen again. She fell asleep that night still fully dressed, too exhausted to change, her dreams filled with pale gold eyes that watched her from the darkness. The knock on her door came just before dawn. At first, Mira thought she had imagined it, some half-formed remnant of sleep bleeding into waking life. But it came again, softer this time, almost hesitant. Not a knock at all, she realized, sitting up sharply. A scratch, low against the wood, near the bottom of the door, the kind an animal might make. Her heart climbed into her throat. She told herself it was nothing. A stray dog, perhaps, drawn by the smell of the dried herbs hanging near her window. She had seen strays before. This was nothing unusual. But when she crept to the door and pulled it open just a crack, the first gray light of morning revealed something that made her breath catch entirely. The wolf sat on her doorstep. Its injured leg was still wrapped in the cloth she had used the day before, now dirtied but holding firm. Its enormous frame nearly filled the narrow space of her small porch, and its pale gold eyes stared up at her with an expression she could not quite name. Not aggression, not even simple curiosity. Something closer to recognition. Mira stood frozen in her doorway, one hand still gripping the frame, staring down at a creature that had traveled, she realized with a chill, from deep within the forbidden woods, all the way to her home, in the heart of the village. A wolf that size crossing open ground, past farms and fences and sleeping houses, without a single soul raising an alarm, seemed almost impossible. And yet here it was. You, she whispered, her voice barely more than breath, should not be here. The wolf tilted its head, ears pricked forward, and made no move to leave. Mira glanced quickly up and down the quiet street, relieved to see no early risers yet stirring, no one to witness the impossible sight standing at her door. Her mind raced through every possible explanation, and found none of them satisfying. Wild wolves did not seek out the humans who helped them. Wild wolves did not walk calmly into villages in broad daylight, risking spears and arrows and the fury of frightened farmers protecting their livestock. Unless this was not in fact an ordinary wolf at all. She pushed that thought away almost as quickly as it arrived. It was foolishness, the kind of thing whispered by old women around fires late at night. Stories meant to frighten children into staying close to home. Shifters were legend, myth, tales meant to explain away things people did not understand, nothing more. And yet the wolf's eyes held an intelligence that no ordinary animal should possess, watching her now with something that felt disturbingly close to patience, as though it were waiting for her to catch up to a truth it already understood. "You cannot stay here," she said firmly, though her voice wavered on the words. "Someone will see you. Someone will hurt you, or worse, they will hurt me for hiding you." The wolf did not move. Mira glanced past it, out toward the tree line, barely visible at the far edge of the village, and made a decision that she would later recognize as the moment everything in her life began to change. "Fine," she muttered under her breath. "Come on then. Quickly, before anyone wakes." She stepped back, holding the door open just wide enough, and the enormous creature rose smoothly to its feet, despite its injury, and slipped inside her home, as though it had always belonged there. She had no way of knowing, as she quietly closed the door behind them both, that she had just given shelter to the most powerful and most hunted man in the entire kingdom. The wolf did not act like a wild animal once it was inside her home. Mira noticed this within the first few minutes, though she tried to convince herself otherwise. It did not sniff at her belongings the way a curious animal might. It did not paw at her cupboard searching for food, or startle at the sound of her kettle creaking on its hook above the cold hearth. Instead, it moved to the corner of her small main room, near the window but away from direct light, and settled down with a controlled, almost deliberate stillness, watching her the entire time with those unsettling gold eyes. "You are a strange wolf," she said quietly, latching the door and drawing the thin curtain across her single window. "Most animals I have treated, at least try to explore a little." The wolf simply blinked at her, unbothered, as though it understood every word, and had chosen, for reasons of its own, not to respond. Mira busied herself gathering fresh water and clean cloth, kneeling beside the animal to check the bandage from the day before. The wound looked better than she expected, the swelling reduced, though it would need proper care for several more days if it was going to heal without infection. As she worked, unwinding the old cloth and replacing it with fresh, she found herself talking again, the same nervous habit from the woods returning now that she was alone with the creature in the quiet of her home. "I do not usually make a habit of hiding wolves in my house," she said, dabbing gently at the wound, with a cloth soaked in warm water and crushed herbs. "In fact, I have never done anything remotely like this before. My mentor would have my head if she knew. Agatha does not believe in taking unnecessary risks, and you, my large friend, are quite possibly the largest risk I have ever taken." The wolf's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, but it made no move to interrupt her work. "You are lucky no one saw you," she continued, tying off the fresh bandage with careful hands. "If the farmers had spotted you near their livestock, they would not have hesitated to put an arrow through you, healing wound or not. People around here do not take kindly to wolves wandering close to their homes, even ordinary ones." Something in the way she said the word ordinary made the wolf's gaze sharpen, just slightly, though Mira did not notice. She was too focused on finishing the bandage and rising to her feet, stretching muscles stiff from crouching for so long. By the time the sun had fully risen, she knew she needed to leave for her morning work at the healer's shop. Agatha expected her promptly, and questions would follow if she arrived late without good reason, questions Mira had no intention of answering honestly. "I have to go to work," she told the wolf, standing near her door, with her satchel already over her shoulder. "You need to stay here, out of sight, and rest that leg. Do not destroy anything. Do not make noise. And for the sake of both our lives, do not let anyone see you through that window." The wolf watched her with what she could have sworn was quiet amusement, though she dismissed the thought immediately as her imagination working overtime from lack of sleep. She spent the entire day at Agatha's shop, distracted and anxious, mixing the wrong herbs twice, and earning a sharp scolding each time. Agatha, a stern woman well into her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight braid, noticed her apprentice's unusual behavior almost immediately. "You are somewhere else today, girl," Agatha said, watching Mira fumble with a jar of dried nettle. "Did something happen in the woods yesterday? You came back later than usual." "Nothing happened," Mira lied, focusing hard on measuring the correct amount of nettle into a small pouch. "I just lost track of time collecting the blue moss you wanted." Agatha's sharp eyes lingered on her a moment longer than comfortable, but she said nothing further, returning to her own work grinding herbs at the wooden counter. Mira exhaled quietly in relief, grateful that her mentor's suspicion had not pushed further, though she knew Agatha rarely let things go entirely. She simply chose her moments carefully. The walk home that evening felt strangely nerve-wracking, as though Mira half expected to find her cottage burned down, or the wolf discovered and dragged away by angry villagers, or worse, simply gone, having decided her home was not shelter enough after all. When she pushed open her door and found the wolf exactly where she had left it, calm and resting in the corner, an unexpected wave of relief washed through her. "You stayed," she said, almost surprised by how pleased she felt about it. "I half thought you would have chewed through my wall by now, or eaten my chickens." The wolf tilted its head, and Mira could have sworn the gesture looked almost offended. "I am joking," she said quickly, setting down her satchel. "Mostly." Over the following days, a strange rhythm began to form between them. Mira would rise early, check the wound, change the bandage, and leave for work with stern instructions the wolf never seemed to need, since it remained hidden and quiet each time she returned. In the evenings, she would sit near the hearth, sharing whatever simple meal she had prepared, breaking off pieces of bread and offering them to the wolf, who accepted the food with a gentleness that continued to surprise her given the size of its jaw. She began calling it Shadow, mostly because the name felt fitting for a creature that seemed to exist just at the edge of understanding, always present, always watching, yet somehow impossible to fully grasp. "Shadow," she said one evening, testing the name aloud as she stirred a small pot of vegetable stew over her hearth fire. "It suits you. You are quiet, you are dark, and you follow me everywhere I go, whether I want you to or not." The wolf made a low sound in response, something between a huff and a groan, and Mira laughed despite herself, the sound surprising her in the quiet of her small home. It was on the fourth evening that she first noticed something was different. She had been telling Shadow about her day, complaining lightly about a difficult customer who had argued over the price of a simple cough remedy, when she glanced over and found the wolf staring at her with an intensity that made her pause mid-sentence. Its gold eyes were fixed on her face, unblinking, filled with something that looked almost like longing, or perhaps regret, though she could not begin to guess what a wolf might have to regret. "What is it?" she asked softly, setting down her spoon. "Did I say something wrong?" Shadow simply looked away, resting its head back down onto its paws, and the strange moment passed as quickly as it had come. But Mira found herself thinking about it long after she had gone to bed that night, turning the memory over in her mind, unable to shake the feeling that there was far more happening behind those golden eyes than any ordinary wolf should possess. Her suspicions only deepened the following week, when strange rumors began circulating through the village. She first heard them from the baker's wife, a talkative woman named Elsie, who seemed to know every piece of gossip within a day of it happening. Mira had stopped by the bakery for bread, half listening as Elsie chattered on to another customer about strangers who had been spotted near the edge of the forbidden woods. "Tall man, dark hair, scars all along one side of his face," Elsie was saying, wrapping a loaf carefully in cloth. "Came through asking questions at 3 different farms yesterday. Very strange manner about him. My husband said he looked like a soldier, the way he carried himself." "What kind of questions?" the other customer asked. "Asking if anyone had seen an unusual wolf." "A big one," he said, "larger than any natural wolf should be. Offered good coin for information." Mira's stomach dropped so suddenly she nearly lost her grip on the bread she had just purchased. "Strange thing to search a village for," the customer replied. "Wolves stay in the woods where they belong." "That is exactly what I told him," Elsie said, shaking her head. "But he insisted, said it was important. Something about the wolf belonging to someone important, though he would not say who." Mira paid quickly and left the bakery in a hurry, her mind racing the entire walk home. A stranger, searching for an unusual wolf. A wolf larger than natural, offering money for information. It could not possibly be a coincidence, not after everything strange she had witnessed over the past several days. She found Shadow waiting in his usual corner when she arrived home, and this time, she could not stop herself from studying him more carefully, searching for anything she might have missed before. The size of him, larger than any wolf she had ever heard described in even the wildest hunting stories. The intelligence behind his eyes, the way he seemed to understand every word she spoke, the way he had somehow known to travel from deep within the forbidden woods, directly to her doorstep, without ever losing his way. "Someone is looking for you," she said quietly, watching his reaction closely. A man, with scars, asking questions in the village. Shadow's entire body went rigid, his ears flattened against his skull, and a low, unmistakable growl rumbled from deep in his chest, though it was not directed at her. It was fear, she realized with a jolt. Genuine, unmistakable fear, the kind she had never before seen in an animal of his size and strength. "You know him," she said, more statement than question. "This man who is searching for you. You are afraid of him." Shadow rose to his feet, pacing anxiously across the small floor of her cottage, his massive frame suddenly seeming too large for the tiny space they shared. Mira watched him move, her earlier suspicions solidifying into something far more concrete, though the full truth still remained frustratingly out of reach. "I do not understand what is happening," she said softly, sinking down onto her chair, exhaustion and confusion warring inside her. "But I think it is time you told me, somehow, exactly what you are, and what kind of danger I have let into my home." Shadow stopped his pacing and turned to face her fully, and for one strange, suspended moment, Mira could have sworn the look in his eyes was almost human, filled with a weight of sadness and caution that no ordinary wolf should ever be capable of carrying. Whatever answer he might have given her would have to wait, however, because at that exact moment, a heavy fist pounded against her front door, and a deep, unfamiliar voice called out from the other side. "I know you are in there. Open this door, and bring out the wolf." Mira's blood turned to ice. The voice outside her door was deep, controlled, and edged with an authority that made her skin prickle with instinctive fear. She had heard plenty of angry customers, stern elders, and frustrated farmers in her years living in the village, but she had never heard anyone speak with quite this much cold command in their tone. Shadow's reaction told her everything she needed to know. He had gone completely still, every muscle in his enormous body coiled and tense, his gold eyes fixed on the door with an expression that was somehow both defensive and resigned, as though he had known this moment would eventually come and had simply been waiting for it. "Stay quiet," Mira whispered, though she doubted the instruction was necessary. She rose slowly from her chair, glancing between the wolf and the door, her mind scrambling for some plan, any plan, that might get them both through the next few minutes safely. The fist pounded against the wood again, harder this time. "I can smell him inside your home," the voice called out. "There is no point pretending otherwise. Open the door." Mira's stomach twisted painfully. She had no idea what kind of man could smell a wolf through a closed door and solid walls, but she suspected the answer to that question was tied directly to whatever secret Shadow had been hiding from her since the very beginning. She crossed to the door on unsteady legs and opened it only enough to reveal a narrow sliver of the evening outside. The man standing on her doorstep was unlike anyone she had ever seen in the village. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell just past his ears and a thick scar running from his temple down to his jaw. His clothes were simple but well made, dark traveling leathers that suggested long journeys rather than village life. His eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over her once, before fixing on the small gap of the doorway behind her. "Where is the wolf?" he said. It was not really a question. "I do not know what you are talking about," Mira replied, forcing steadiness into her voice that she did not entirely feel. "I live alone. There is no wolf here." The stranger's gaze narrowed, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to hold his stare. After a long, tense moment, something in his posture shifted, just slightly, a fraction of tension easing from his shoulders, though his eyes remained sharp and watchful. "You are lying," he said, though his tone had softened somewhat, no longer quite so commanding. "But you are also protecting him, which tells me you do not fully understand what you have taken into your home." Mira's heart pounded. "I told you, there is no—" "His name is Alaric," the stranger interrupted quietly, "and if he is truly inside this house, healing from wounds a poacher's trap should never have been able to inflict on someone like him, then you are in far more danger than you realize, simply by having helped him." Behind her, she heard a low growl building in Shadow's throat, and for a moment, she feared the wolf might lunge past her toward the stranger at the door. But instead, something remarkable happened. The growling stopped abruptly, replaced by an odd, choked sound, almost like recognition. "Corwin," a voice said from behind her, low and rough, and Mira spun around in shock. The wolf was gone. In its place knelt a man, tall and powerfully built, with the same dark hair and pale gold eyes she had grown familiar with over the past several days, though now they belonged to a human face rather than an animal one. He was wrapped only in the thin blanket she had left near his corner, his bare shoulders marked with old scars and, more freshly, the bandage she herself had applied just that morning, now visible around a human calf rather than a wolf's leg. Mira's mind went completely blank with shock. She stumbled backward, one hand flying to her mouth, staring at the transformation that should have been utterly impossible, and yet had somehow happened directly in front of her. "You," she managed to whisper, "were a wolf." The man on her floor, the one Shadow had somehow become, looked up at her with an expression caught between exhaustion and something that looked painfully like guilt. "I am sorry," he said quietly, his voice carrying the same deep timbre she had heard through her door moments earlier, though softer now, more tired. "I should have told you sooner. I did not know how, and I was not certain I could trust anyone, even someone who had already saved my life." The stranger at the door, the one called Corwin, pushed past Mira, without waiting for permission, stepping fully into her small home and closing the door firmly behind him. His sharp eyes studied the man on the floor, with visible relief, though the tension in his shoulders did not fully disappear. "You fool," Corwin said, though there was clear affection buried beneath the frustration in his voice. "Do you have any idea how long we have searched for you? The entire border patrol has been scouring these woods since you disappeared. Some believed you were already dead." "I nearly was," the man replied grimly, glancing down at his bandaged leg. The trap very nearly finished what they started at the meeting hall. Mira's head was spinning, struggling to keep pace with a conversation that seemed to reference events and dangers she knew nothing about. "Someone want to explain to me what exactly is happening in my house right now?" she managed to ask, her voice higher and shakier than she intended. Both men turned to look at her, and for a moment, silence stretched heavy and awkward between the three of them. "My name is Alaric," the man on the floor said finally, his gold eyes meeting hers directly, "and I owe you a debt I am not certain I will ever be able to properly repay." "That does not answer my question," Mira said, crossing her arms, though the gesture did little to disguise how badly her hands were still shaking. Corwin let out a short, humorless laugh. "Perhaps it is easier if I simply say it plainly, since my friend here seems reluctant to speak the words himself." He glanced toward Alaric, who gave a small, tired nod of permission. "The man sitting on your floor, the one you have apparently been nursing back to health under the impression he was an ordinary wolf, is the Alpha King of the Shifter Kingdom that lies beyond these woods." Mira stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was an elaborate joke at her expense. None came. "The what?" she said flatly. "Of the where?" "The Shifter Kingdom," Corwin repeated patiently, as though explaining something to a confused child. "A realm hidden beyond the boundary stones of this forest, governed for generations by those born with the ability to change between human and wolf form. Alaric has ruled as its Alpha King for the past 6 years, since his father's death." Mira looked back at Alaric, searching his face for any sign that this was somehow untrue, some elaborate misunderstanding that would resolve itself into something far less impossible. But his expression remained steady, tired, and entirely sincere. "Why," she said slowly, forcing her thoughts into some kind of order, "was the Alpha King of a hidden Shifter Kingdom caught in a poacher's trap in these woods, nearly bleeding to death, with no guards and no explanation?" A shadow passed over Alaric's face, something dark and painful that made Mira's earlier fear shift briefly into something closer to sympathy despite the impossibility of everything happening around her. "Because someone within my own court tried to have me killed," he said quietly, "and very nearly succeeded." The room fell silent again. Mira sank slowly into her chair, her legs no longer entirely willing to support her weight, and stared at the two men now occupying her small home, one of them apparently a king from a kingdom she had never known existed, hunted by his own people, hidden inside her cottage for nearly a week without her ever suspecting the truth. "Explain," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "All of it, from the beginning." Corwin glanced toward Alaric, waiting for his king's permission before speaking, and Alaric gave a slow, resigned nod. "3 weeks ago," Corwin began, settling onto the edge of Mira's small table since there was nowhere else to sit. "Alaric called a meeting of the court council to discuss increasing tensions along our eastern border. During that meeting, several council members attempted a coordinated attack, poisoning the meeting hall's ventilation system with a substance designed to weaken shifters and prevent transformation, followed by an armed assault meant to finish what the poison started." "Someone tried to kill you at a council meeting," Mira said, looking at Alaric with something between horror and disbelief. "Several someones," Alaric confirmed grimly. "Led by a council member named Draven, who has long believed the throne should belong to him, rather than to my bloodline. I managed to escape during the chaos, though not without injury, and fled into these woods hoping to lose any pursuers, while I recovered enough strength to return and expose the conspiracy. Instead," Corwin added dryly, "he ran directly into a poacher's trap and nearly finished the job Draven's men started." "I had other things on my mind," Alaric muttered, shooting his friend an irritated look that felt oddly normal despite everything else happening in the conversation. Mira pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to absorb the sheer scale of what she was being told. A hidden kingdom. A king hunted by his own council. An assassination attempt disguised as a border meeting. And somehow, impossibly, all of it had led directly to her small cottage at the edge of an ordinary village, where she had unknowingly been sheltering the most powerful and most hunted man in an entire kingdom she had never known existed. "Who else knows he is here?" she asked, looking at Corwin. "No one," Corwin replied. "I have been searching alone, quietly, avoiding contact with Draven's supporters as much as possible. If word reaches the wrong ears that Alaric survived, and worse, that he is recovering here, in an undefended village with no shifter protection whatsoever. Draven will not hesitate to send men to finish what they started. The weight of that statement settled heavily over the small room. Mira looked at Alaric, seeing him now not as the quiet, wounded wolf she had grown fond of over the past several days, but as a man carrying the impossible burden of a kingdom in crisis, his own life hanging by a thread, even now that he had survived his initial injuries. "You lied to me," she said quietly, though the accusation held less anger than she expected it to. "For days, I fed you, I tended your wounds, I told you about my entire day, as though you were simply a wolf who happened to understand me, and this whole time, you were letting me believe something that was not true." Alaric's expression flickered with genuine remorse. "I did not lie to protect myself alone," he said carefully. "I lied because I did not know if I could trust you, and because the truth would have put you in exactly the kind of danger Corwin just described. The fewer people who knew what I truly was, the safer you would remain. That was not your decision to make for me," Mira said, though her voice had lost most of its earlier sharpness, replaced by something closer to exhausted understanding. "I deserved to know what I was risking, even if the truth was frightening." "You are right," Alaric admitted quietly, "and I am sorry for that, even if my reasoning felt sound at the time." Corwin cleared his throat, glancing between the two of them with an expression that suggested he found the exchange somewhat amusing, despite the gravity of their situation. "As touching as this is, we do have a rather pressing problem to address. Alaric's leg is not yet healed enough for him to travel safely, and Draven's search parties have been expanding their reach toward this exact region for the past several days. It is only a matter of time before they think to search the village itself." Mira felt a fresh wave of fear settle over her at the thought of armed strangers, potentially far more dangerous than the man who had already stood pounding on her door, arriving in her quiet village searching for a hidden king. "What do we do?" she asked, surprised to find that the question came out as we rather than you, as though some part of her had already decided her fate was now tangled together with Alaric's, whether she wished it to be or not. Alaric looked at her for a long moment, gold eyes searching her face with an expression she could not quite decipher, somewhere between gratitude and quiet apology. "We wait, and we prepare," he said finally, "and we hope that whatever time remains before Draven's men find their way here is enough time for my leg to heal, and for us to devise some plan that does not end with either of us dead." Outside, the evening had deepened into full darkness, and somewhere beyond the edges of the village, in the vast unknown reaches of the forbidden woods, Mira knew that men loyal to a traitor were combing every shadow, searching for exactly the secret now hidden inside her small, ordinary home. She had no way of knowing yet just how thoroughly her quiet, simple life had already ended the moment she chose to free a wounded wolf from a poacher's snare, or how much more dangerous, and how much more extraordinary, the days ahead were about to become. Sleep did not come easily to Mira that night. She lay on her narrow bed, listening to the low murmur of voices from the main room, where Alaric and Corwin continued speaking long after she had retreated, discussing matters of border patrols, council loyalties, and strategies she barely understood. Every so often, she caught fragments of names she did not recognize, places she had never heard of, and the careful, weighted tone of two men trying to plan their way out of a situation that could easily end in death. When she finally rose the next morning, heavy-eyed and unrested, she found Corwin already gone, slipped away sometime before dawn to continue his search for information about Draven's movements, leaving Alaric alone in her small home once more, though now fully human and dressed in spare clothes that Corwin had apparently brought for him. Seeing him like this, tall and broad-shouldered in simple traveling clothes rather than wolf form, made the entire situation feel strangely more real and more surreal at the same time. This was the man whose leg she had bandaged 3 times, the same gold eyes now set into a face marked by quiet exhaustion and lingering pain. "You should not be standing," she said immediately, noting the careful way he balanced most of his weight on his uninjured leg. "I have spent enough days lying in a corner of your home," Alaric replied, though he lowered himself gratefully onto her chair when she gestured toward it. "A king who cannot stand is not much use to his kingdom. A king who reopens his wound because he refused to rest is even less use," Mira countered, already moving to check the bandage despite his protest. "Sit still and let me look at this properly." Alaric watched her work with quiet attentiveness as she unwrapped the cloth and examined the healing wound beneath. It looked better than she expected, the swelling continuing to reduce, new skin beginning to knit across the worst of the damage, though it would still need careful protection for several more days before he could risk any real exertion. "You are skilled at this," he observed as she applied fresh herbs and rewrapped the leg with practiced hands. "I have had a great deal of practice," she replied. "Village life produces more injuries than you might expect. Farming accidents, kitchen burns, children who fall from trees they should never have been climbing in the first place. None of those injuries belong to a king in hiding, I imagine." Mira glanced up at him, catching the faint, tired humor in his expression. "No," she agreed. "This is certainly a first for me." A comfortable silence settled between them as she finished her work, though Mira found her thoughts drifting toward all the questions she had not yet had the chance to ask. Finally, unable to hold back her curiosity any longer, she settled back onto her heels and looked at him directly. "Tell me about your kingdom," she said. "If I am going to be involved in whatever happens next, I would like to understand what exactly I am involving myself in." Alaric considered her request for a long moment before nodding slowly. "The Shifter Kingdom lies beyond the deepest reaches of these woods, hidden from human eyes by old magic, woven into the boundary stones generations ago. We are not so different from the villagers here, in most ways. We farm, we trade, we raise families. The difference lies simply in our ability to change form, an ability passed down through certain bloodlines for longer than anyone can properly remember. And you rule this kingdom," Mira said. "As Alpha King. My family has held the throne for 6 generations," he confirmed. "My father ruled for nearly 40 years before his death, and I inherited the crown at an age when I was, admittedly, not fully prepared for the burden that came with it." "What happened to your father?" "Illness," Alaric said, his voice quieter now. "Not violence, at least. A small mercy, given everything that followed." Mira studied his face, noting the careful control he maintained, even while discussing something clearly painful, and found herself unexpectedly moved by the quiet dignity beneath his exhaustion. "And this council member, Draven. Why does he want you dead?" Alaric's expression hardened slightly. "Ambition, mostly, though he would frame it differently. Draven believes my father's line grew too soft, too willing to maintain peace with neighboring territories, rather than expand our influence through strength. He has spent years quietly building support among council members who share his views, waiting for an opportunity to seize control."
"And the attack at the meeting was that opportunity?"
"Yes, though I suspect he did not expect me to survive it, let alone escape entirely undetected. My continued existence, even in hiding, remains a significant problem for whatever plans he intends to enact next." Mira sat with this information for a long moment, turning it over in her mind, trying to fully grasp the weight of what she had unknowingly become entangled in. "What happens if he succeeds? If you do not return, or if you return too late?" "Draven consolidates power," Alaric said grimly. "He eliminates any remaining loyalists among the council, likely through means far less subtle than poison and ambush. And a kingdom that has known relative peace for generations finds itself instead under the rule of a man who believes strength is best measured through conquest and fear." The gravity of his words settled heavily over the small room. Mira thought of her own quiet village, peaceful and unremarkable, and tried to imagine an entire hidden kingdom thrown into the kind of chaos and cruelty Alaric was describing, simply because one ambitious man had decided the throne belonged to him rather than its rightful heir. "Then you have to go back," she said finally. "Once you are strong enough, you have to stop him." "That is my intention," Alaric agreed, though returning without proof of Draven's betrayal, or without support from council members who remain loyal to my family, would simply be walking directly into another assassination attempt, likely one with a much higher chance of success than the last. "So what do you need?" "Time," he said simply. "Time to heal fully. Time for Corwin to gather information about which council members can still be trusted, and time to devise a plan that does not rely purely on hoping Draven's men fail to find us before we are ready to act." Mira nodded slowly, though a new worry had already begun forming in the back of her mind. And if his men find this village before that time runs out? Alaric's expression grew somber. Then we will have a much smaller window of time than either of us would prefer, and considerably more danger to navigate. The conversation left Mira feeling both more informed and more anxious than before, though she found herself grateful, in a strange way, that Alaric had chosen to be fully honest with her this time, rather than continuing to hide behind careful half-truths. Over the following days, a new rhythm settled between them, different from the quiet routine they had shared when she believed him simply to be an injured wolf. Now in the evenings, they spoke at length, Alaric sharing more details about his kingdom, its customs, and its people, while Mira found herself opening up in turn about her own life, the loss of her mother, her apprenticeship under Agatha's stern but caring guidance, and her quiet hope that one day she might become a fully qualified healer in her own right, rather than simply an assistant fetching herbs and mixing remedies under someone else's supervision. "You have a gift for this work," Alaric told her one evening, watching as she carefully ground herbs for a fresh poultice. "I have known trained healers within my own court who show less skill and patience than you demonstrate without formal training." Agatha would disagree, Mira said, though the compliment brought unexpected warmth to her cheeks. "She reminds me daily of everything I still have left to learn." "Perhaps," Alaric said quietly, "or perhaps she simply recognizes talent and wishes to see it fully developed, rather than allowing complacency to settle in too early." Mira glanced up at him, surprised by the unexpected insight, and found his gold eyes already watching her, with an expression that made her stomach flutter in a way she quickly tried to dismiss as simple exhaustion from the long days of careful secrecy and constant worry. It was on the 6th evening after Corwin's initial visit that new trouble arrived, carried in the form of Corwin himself, returning to the cottage with a grim expression that immediately silenced whatever easy conversation had been passing between Mira and Alaric moments before. "They have reached the neighboring village," Corwin said without preamble, closing the door firmly behind him. "Draven's search parties. 3 of them arrived this morning, asking the same questions I once asked here, though with considerably less patience, and considerably more coin to loosen tongues." Alaric's expression darkened immediately. "How long before they reach this village?" "A day, perhaps 2, if we are fortunate." Corwin's eyes flicked toward Mira, an unspoken apology in his gaze. "I am sorry to bring such news into your home, but you both need to understand the danger has grown considerably more immediate." Mira felt a cold weight settle in her stomach, as the full reality of the situation crashed over her once more. "What do we do?" "We cannot stay here," Alaric said, already attempting to rise despite the healer's protest rising instinctively in Mira's throat. "If they search this village and find any sign of my presence, everyone here becomes a target, including you, Mira, simply for having offered me shelter." "Your leg is not healed," Mira said firmly, pressing a hand against his shoulder to keep him seated. "Moving now, before it has properly recovered, could undo everything we have worked toward. Remaining here endangers your entire village," Alaric countered, though he did not shrug off her hand. Corwin cleared his throat, drawing both their attention. "There may be another option, a hidden shelter deeper within the forest, closer to the boundary stones, known only to a small number of loyal scouts. It would take us out of the village entirely, reducing the risk to innocent villagers, while still allowing Alaric time to continue healing away from prying eyes." "How far?" Mira asked. "Half a day's travel on foot, less if we move carefully and avoid the main paths." Alaric considered this option for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "It is our best choice, given the circumstances." He turned to look at Mira, his gold eyes searching her face with an expression that carried unmistakable weight. "You do not have to come with us. You have already done more than I had any right to ask, and returning to your ordinary life here, away from this danger, would be entirely understandable." Mira looked between the two men, feeling the full weight of the decision now resting squarely on her shoulders. She thought of her quiet cottage, her apprenticeship with Agatha, the simple, predictable rhythm of village life that had defined her entire existence up until the moment she had chosen to free a wounded wolf from a poacher's snare. She thought too of the fear in Alaric's eyes when he first spoke of Draven, the quiet dignity with which he carried the weight of an entire kingdom's fate, and the strange, undeniable bond that had grown between them over these past several days, despite every reason it should not have. "I am coming with you," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected. You still need someone who knows how to properly care for that leg, and clearly neither of you is equipped to manage that particular task alone. Corwin let out a short laugh despite the tension in the room, while Alaric's expression softened into something that looked remarkably like relief, mixed with a gratitude too deep for simple words to fully capture. "Then we leave tonight," Corwin said, already moving toward the door to begin preparations, before Draven's men have any chance of reaching this village at all. Mira began gathering her healer's supplies with hands that trembled only slightly, aware that whatever quiet, ordinary life she had known until now was about to be left behind entirely, replaced by something far more dangerous and far more uncertain than she had ever imagined possible just one short week before. They left under cover of darkness, moving quietly along the edge of the village, before slipping into the tree line, where the forbidden woods began their slow, shadowed climb into deeper wilderness. Mira had never traveled this deep into the forest before, not even during her most ambitious searches for rare herbs. The trees here grew taller and closer together, their branches weaving into a thick canopy that blocked out most of the moonlight, leaving only thin silver threads to guide their path. Corwin led the way with confident, practiced steps, while Alaric walked slower behind him, favoring his injured leg, despite his clear determination not to show any weakness. "You should let me carry some of your weight," Mira whispered, noticing the tightness in his jaw with each step. "I have walked through worse," Alaric replied quietly, though his voice carried a strain that betrayed the truth behind his words. "That is not an answer to what I said." A faint, tired smile crossed his face, despite the tension of their situation. "You argue, like someone who has spent years caring for stubborn patients." "I have," Mira said. "Farmers who refuse to rest broken bones, mothers who insist on working through fevers that should have kept them in bed for days. Kings, apparently, are no different." "I would take offense to that comparison," Alaric murmured, "if it were not so entirely accurate." Despite the danger surrounding them, despite the exhaustion already beginning to weigh on her limbs, Mira found herself smiling in the darkness, grateful for these small moments of levity, amid everything else pressing down upon them. Their progress slowed considerably as the night deepened, the uneven forest floor littered with roots and loose stones that made every step a careful negotiation. Corwin paused frequently, listening intently to sounds Mira could barely register, his senses clearly far sharper than her own. It was during one such pause, perhaps 2 hours into their journey, that Corwin's entire posture changed, his relaxed watchfulness sharpening abruptly into alert tension. "Someone is close," he said in a low voice, raising a hand to signal them both to stop moving. Multiple someones, moving through the trees to the east. Alaric's expression hardened immediately, his hand instinctively moving toward the small dagger Corwin had brought for him, though his stance remained careful, protective of his still healing leg.
"Draven's men?"
Mira whispered, her heart suddenly pounding hard enough that she feared it might give away their position entirely. "Possibly," Corwin murmured, "or simply hunters unaware of what they have stumbled near. Either way, we cannot risk discovery." He gestured toward a dense cluster of underbrush a short distance away, thick enough to provide reasonable cover, and the three of them moved quickly and quietly toward it, sinking down into the shadows, just as the first sounds of approaching footsteps became audible, even to Mira's untrained ears. Voices drifted through the trees moments later, low and businesslike, discussing something about search patterns and reporting back to a rendezvous point before dawn. Mira held her breath, pressing herself as flat as possible against the cold earth, acutely aware of Alaric's tense presence beside her, and the dangerous proximity of men who, if Corwin's suspicions proved correct, would not hesitate to kill all three of them if given the chance. The footsteps drew closer, close enough that Mira could make out the shapes of at least 4 figures moving through gaps in the underbrush, dressed in dark traveling clothes, similar to Corwin's own, though marked with an insignia she did not recognize stitched into their shoulders. One of the men paused not 10 paces from where they hid, scanning the surrounding trees with slow, deliberate attention that made Mira's entire body go rigid with fear. Beside her, she felt Alaric shift almost imperceptibly, positioning himself slightly in front of her despite his injury, a silent and instinctive act of protection that she noticed even through her own overwhelming fear. The searching man lingered a moment longer before finally turning away, calling something quietly to his companions, and the group moved onward, their voices and footsteps gradually fading back into the depths of the forest, until silence settled once more over their hiding place. No one moved for several long minutes afterward, each of them straining to be certain the danger had truly passed. "That was too close," Corwin finally murmured, rising carefully from the underbrush and helping Mira to her feet. "They are searching farther from the village than I anticipated. We need to move more carefully from here." "Were those Draven's men?" Mira asked, her voice still shaky from the encounter. "Almost certainly," Alaric confirmed grimly, accepting Corwin's assistance in rising, despite his obvious reluctance to appear in need of help. "The insignia on their shoulders belongs to the Eastern Border Patrol, a division that answers directly to Draven's command structure." "Then they know you survived," Mira said, the implication settling heavily over her. "They suspect it, at least," Corwin said. "Enough to justify searching this deep into unclaimed territory, rather than simply securing the kingdom's borders as their official duties would normally require." They continued their journey with considerably more caution after that encounter, moving slower, pausing more frequently. Corwin's senses stretched taut as he guided them carefully around any further sign of danger. The remaining hours of their travel passed in tense, watchful silence, broken only occasionally by quiet, necessary conversation regarding their path forward. Dawn was beginning to lighten the sky by the time they finally reached their destination, a small, well-hidden structure, built into the side of a rocky hill, its entrance disguised by a thick curtain of hanging vines that would have been nearly invisible to anyone not specifically searching for it. "This is it," Corwin said, pulling aside the vines to reveal a narrow entrance leading into what appeared to be a modest but sturdy shelter, carved partially into the hillside itself, built generations ago as an emergency refuge for scouts and border patrols. Few outside the Royal Guard even know it exists. The interior proved more spacious than its hidden entrance suggested, a single main chamber with simple furnishings, a small hearth built into one wall with proper ventilation, and enough supplies stored in wooden crates to sustain a small group for several weeks if necessary. Mira looked around with quiet relief, grateful to have finally reached somewhere that offered at least the illusion of safety after the tense hours of their journey. "You should rest," she told Alaric immediately, noting the pale, strained look that had settled over his face during the final stretch of their travel. "That leg has taken far more strain than it should have tonight." For once, Alaric did not argue, lowering himself carefully onto one of the simple cots along the chamber wall, his exhaustion clearly outweighing any instinct toward stubborn pride. Mira knelt beside him immediately, examining the wound with careful, practiced hands, relieved to find that despite the difficult journey, the injury had not reopened, though the swelling had increased somewhat from the exertion. "You need to keep weight off this for at least the next several days," she said firmly, applying fresh herbs from her dwindling supply, and wrapping the leg with clean cloth Corwin had thoughtfully packed among their supplies. "No more midnight escapes through dangerous forests, regardless of how urgent the circumstances might seem." "I will do my best," Alaric murmured, though the faint, tired smile on his face suggested he found her sternness more endearing than intimidating. Corwin, meanwhile, busied himself securing the entrance and setting up a simple watch rotation, explaining quietly that he intended to remain nearby for the coming days, alternating between guarding their hidden shelter and venturing out cautiously to gather further information about Draven's movements and the loyalties of remaining council members within the kingdom. As the first full light of morning began filtering faintly through small gaps near the chamber's ceiling, exhaustion finally overtook all three of them, and for the first time in what felt like days, Mira allowed herself to fully rest, curled beneath a rough woolen blanket on a cot near Alaric's own, comforted despite everything by the steady sound of his breathing nearby, and the quiet knowledge that, for now at least, they had found a measure of safety amid the growing danger surrounding them. She woke hours later to the soft sound of voices, Corwin and Alaric speaking quietly near the small hearth, and lay still for a moment simply listening, unwilling, yet to announce that she had woken. "She should not be involved in any of this," Alaric was saying, his voice low and troubled. "I never intended for an innocent village healer to become entangled in council politics and assassination plots." "And yet here she is," Corwin replied evenly. "By her own choice, I might add, not yours. She could have remained safely in her village, and instead, she chose to follow you into considerably more danger than she has any obligation to face. That does not make it right." No, Corwin agreed. But it does make it her choice to make, not yours to override simply because you feel responsible for the danger she now faces. A long silence followed, and Mira, still pretending to sleep, felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest at the quiet concern evident in Alaric's words, even as she found herself agreeing more with Corwin's perspective on the matter. She is remarkable, Alaric said finally, his voice quieter now, almost private, as though he had forgotten Corwin remained close enough to hear. I have known trained physicians within my own court who show less skill, and certainly less courage, than she has demonstrated since the moment she first found me in that trap. High praise from a king not known for offering compliments easily, Corwin observed, a note of teasing evident beneath his otherwise serious tone. Do not read too much into it, Alaric muttered, though Mira, still listening quietly from beneath her blanket, could hear something in his voice that suggested there was, perhaps, considerably more to read into it than he wished to admit. She kept her eyes closed a moment longer, allowing herself to simply sit with the strange, unexpected warmth of his words, before finally stirring and announcing her wakefulness, unwilling yet to examine too closely what exactly that warmth might mean for the increasingly uncertain path that now lay ahead of them all. The days that followed settled into a careful, quiet rhythm within the hidden shelter, though the underlying tension of their situation never fully faded. Corwin left frequently, sometimes for hours, sometimes for the better part of a full day, venturing cautiously toward the kingdom's outer settlements to gather whatever information he could about Draven's movements and the shifting loyalties among the council. Each time he returned, Mira found herself watching his expression closely, searching for any sign of the news he carried before he had even spoken a word. 3 more council members have declared support for Draven, Corwin reported one evening, settling wearily onto a crate near the small hearth fire. Fear, mostly, rather than genuine loyalty. He has made it clear that anyone who continues supporting the missing king will be treated as a traitor to the kingdom once his position is fully secured. And the council members who remain loyal? Alaric asked, his expression tight with concern. Quiet, for now. Lady Wren and Elder Bramwell have not spoken publicly against Draven, but they have not pledged support either. I believe they are waiting to see whether you truly survived before committing themselves either way. Alaric absorbed this information with a slow, thoughtful nod, clearly turning over the implications carefully in his mind. Mira, sitting nearby mending a torn piece of cloth by the dim firelight, found herself increasingly drawn into these strategic discussions, offering occasional observations that surprised even herself with their usefulness. If Lady Wren and Elder Bramwell are waiting for proof you survived, she said thoughtfully, then perhaps the answer is not to hide that proof any longer, but to present it carefully, on your own terms, before Draven has the chance to control how the news reaches them. Both men turned to look at her with matching expressions of surprise. Go on, Alaric said, leaning forward with genuine interest. You cannot simply walk back into the council chambers, not with Draven controlling most of the guard, and half the council already pledged to him, Mira continued, warming to the idea as she spoke. But if you could reach Lady Wren and Elder Bramwell directly, privately, before Draven learns you have returned, you would have the chance to present your case and secure their support before he has any opportunity to interfere. Corwin nodded slowly, clearly impressed despite himself. It is a reasonable approach. Both Lady Wren and Elder Bramwell maintain private estates outside the main council grounds. Reaching either of them quietly would be considerably safer than attempting a direct return to the capital. It would still carry significant risk, Alaric said, though his tone suggested he was already seriously considering the plan. If either of them has secretly aligned with Draven, despite outward appearances, we would be walking directly into a trap. Everything we do from this point forward carries risk, Mira pointed out. The question is simply which risks offer the best chance of success. Alaric studied her for a long moment, something in his gold eyes shifting into an expression she had begun to recognize over their days together, a kind of quiet, growing respect that went beyond simple gratitude for her earlier care of his injuries. You continue to surprise me, he said quietly. I have spent years listening to Agatha navigate difficult customers and complicated village politics, Mira replied, feeling warmth rise in her cheeks under his steady attention. It turns out the same principles apply reasonably well to kingdoms and conspiracies. The plan took shape over the following days, refined through careful discussion each evening, as Corwin continued gathering information during his cautious excursions beyond their hidden shelter. Lady Wren, it turned out, maintained an estate roughly 2 days' travel from their current location, situated close enough to the boundary of human territory that reaching it would require passing through some of the most heavily patrolled sections of Draven's search efforts. Alaric's leg, meanwhile, continued healing steadily under Mira's careful attention, though she remained firm in her insistence that he needed at least several more days of rest before attempting any journey as demanding as reaching Lady Wren's estate. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as Corwin slept near the entrance and the fire had burned down to gentle embers, that Mira found herself alone with Alaric for one of the few genuinely peaceful moments they had shared since fleeing the village. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Of course. Before all of this, before the attack, before you were forced to flee into these woods, what was your life like? As king, I mean. What did an ordinary day look like for you?" Alaric considered the question for a long moment, a faint, almost wistful expression crossing his features. "Considerably more structured than these past weeks have allowed," he said finally. "Council meetings, border inspections, disputes between territories requiring judgment. Less time than I would have liked spent simply among my people, seeing to their everyday concerns rather than the larger matters of governance." "That sounds lonely," Mira observed softly. Something flickered across his face at her words, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "It can be," he admitted. "Ruling carries a particular kind of isolation that is difficult to explain to those who have not experienced it directly. Everyone around you has some stake in your decisions, some interest in influencing your judgment. Finding genuine, uncomplicated connection becomes increasingly rare." "And now?" Mira asked, unable to fully keep the curiosity from her voice. "Hiding in the woods, healing from wounds inflicted by your own counsel, is that lonelier still, or somehow less so?" Alaric's gold eyes met hers directly across the dim firelight, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, the quiet weight of the question hanging heavily between them. "Strangely," he said finally, his voice low and unusually vulnerable, "it has been less lonely than any period I can remember since taking the crown. Which says a great deal, I suppose, about the peculiar nature of the circumstances that brought us together." Mira's heart beat unexpectedly fast at his words, and she found herself unable to look away from the quiet sincerity in his expression. "I suppose it does," she said softly. Neither of them moved to close the small distance that remained between them, though the air itself seemed to carry a new kind of tension, warmer and far more complicated than the fear and urgency that had defined most of their days together until now. Finally, Alaric cleared his throat and looked away, breaking whatever fragile moment had been building between them. "You should rest," he said, his voice returning to its more familiar, measured tone. "Tomorrow will bring more planning, and you have already given more of yourself to this situation than anyone could reasonably ask." Mira nodded, though a small, disappointed part of her wished the moment had continued, rather than retreating back into careful distance. "Good night, Alaric," she said softly, rising to return to her own cot. "Good night, Mira," he replied, and something in the way he said her name, quiet and warm in the dim firelight, stayed with her, long after she had closed her eyes, carrying her into dreams considerably gentler than the fear and uncertainty that had defined so many of her recent nights. She did not yet know, as sleep finally claimed her, just how quickly that fragile peace was about to be shattered, or how soon the growing danger surrounding them would force its way directly into the quiet sanctuary they had worked so carefully to build. The attack came just before dawn, when the world outside their hidden shelter still lay wrapped in gray half-light, and the fire had burned down to nothing but cold ash. Mira woke to the sound of Corwin's sharp, urgent whisper, shaking her shoulder with a firmness that immediately banished any lingering trace of sleep from her mind. "Wake up, now, we have company." She sat up instantly, heart already pounding, and saw Alaric on his feet across the chamber, his expression grim and alert, despite having been asleep only moments before. "How many?" he asked Corwin quietly. "I counted 6, as they approached from the eastern ridge. There may be more I did not see." Corwin was already moving toward the entrance, checking the small dagger at his belt with practiced efficiency. "They found the shelter somehow. I do not know how, but they are moving with purpose, not simply searching blindly. Someone talked, Alaric said darkly. Or someone was followed without realizing it, Corwin countered, though his tone carried little conviction that the distinction mattered much at this particular moment. Mira scrambled to her feet, her mind racing through their limited options. The shelter had only one real entrance, the narrow, vine-covered opening Corwin had shown them upon their arrival, which meant escape would require either fighting their way past whoever approached, or finding some alternative route she was not aware existed. "Is there another way out?" she asked, already gathering what few supplies she could carry quickly. "A narrow ventilation shaft near the rear of the chamber," Corwin said, gesturing toward a small opening near the ceiling that Mira had barely noticed during their days sheltering here. "Too small for either of us to fit through comfortably, but it might work for you." "I am not leaving without both of you," Mira said firmly, surprising herself with the immediate certainty of her own refusal. "This is not the moment for stubbornness," Alaric said sharply, though his eyes carried more concern than command. "If they capture you here, you become a hostage, or worse, a message sent back to whoever remains loyal to me among the council. And if I leave through some narrow shaft while both of you fight 6 armed men, with one of you barely able to stand on his own leg, what exactly do you imagine happens to either of you?" Mira shot back, refusing to back down despite the danger pressing closer with each passing second. Before the argument could continue further, the sound of voices reached them from just outside the shelter's entrance, low and businesslike, confirming that whatever debate remained about their next move needed to happen immediately, or not at all. Corwin's expression hardened into something cold and decisive. "There is no more time for this discussion. Alaric, take position near the entrance where your leg will not be tested by sudden movement. Mira, stay behind us both, and if I tell you to run, you run, regardless of what either of us has said about it before." Mira opened her mouth to protest again, but the sound of the vines outside being pulled aside silenced any further argument, and all 3 of them turned toward the entrance as the first armed figure ducked through the narrow opening into their hidden chamber. What followed happened faster than Mira's mind could fully process. Corwin moved first, meeting the intruder with brutal, controlled efficiency, disarming him within seconds despite the man's obvious training. But behind him, more figures pushed through the entrance, and within moments, the small chamber had become a chaotic tangle of struggling bodies, the clash of steel against steel ringing sharply off the stone walls. Alaric fought, despite his injured leg, his movements more restricted than they clearly would have been under normal circumstances, but no less dangerous for the limitation. Mira watched in horror and fascination as he moved with a controlled, deadly grace that spoke of years of training, disarming one attacker before turning immediately to meet another. But there were simply too many of them. Mira saw the moment things began turning against her companions, watched as a 6th attacker slipped past the chaos near the entrance and moved directly toward her, clearly identifying her as the easiest target in the confused struggle. Panic surged through her, but beneath it, something else rose as well, a sharp, clear determination she had not expected to find within herself. Her eyes fell on the small satchel of herbs she had grabbed moments before, specifically a pouch of finely ground pepperwort powder she used for treating certain skin conditions, a substance known among healers for causing intense, temporary blindness if it made contact with someone's eyes. She did not hesitate. As the attacker closed the final distance toward her, Mira flung the entire contents of the pouch directly into his face, and the man staggered backward with a strangled cry, both hands flying instinctively to his eyes, momentarily blind and completely incapacitated. "Behind you!" Corwin's shout cut through the chaos, and Mira spun just in time to see another attacker breaking away from his struggle with Alaric, moving quickly toward her with clear intent. She grabbed the first solid object within reach, a heavy wooden crate lid, and swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed, directly into the approaching man's midsection. The impact staggered him, and before he could fully recover, Corwin had closed the distance, ending the confrontation with a swift, decisive strike. The remaining fight ended quickly after that, the combination of Alaric and Corwin's combat skill, and the sudden loss of 2 attackers proving too much for the remaining assailants, who retreated hastily back through the narrow entrance, dragging their incapacitated companions with them. Silence settled heavily over the chamber in the aftermath, broken only by their own ragged breathing and the distant sound of retreating footsteps fading into the forest beyond. "Is everyone all right?" Mira asked shakily, looking between the two men for any sign of serious injury. "A few new bruises," Corwin said, wincing slightly as he rolled his shoulder. "Nothing that requires your particular skills, though I appreciate the offer implicit in the question." Alaric, however, had gone unusually pale, and Mira's healer's instincts sharpened immediately at the sight. "You are hurt," she said, moving toward him quickly. "It is nothing," Alaric said, though the tightness in his voice suggested otherwise. "That is exactly what people say, right before they are very much not fine," Mira replied firmly, already examining him with careful, practiced hands. She found the wound quickly, a shallow but bleeding cut along his ribs where one attacker had clearly landed a strike during the chaos of the fight. "You should have mentioned this immediately," she scolded, already reaching for clean cloth to address the injury. "There were more pressing matters at the time," Alaric said, though he allowed her to work without further argument, a small concession that told Mira exactly how much pain he was actually experiencing despite his attempts to downplay it. As she worked to clean and bandage the new wound, her hands remarkably steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system, Corwin busied himself checking the shelter's entrance and confirming that their attackers had indeed retreated, rather than simply regrouping for a second attempt. "They know our location now," he said grimly, returning to where Mira continued tending Alaric's injury. "We cannot remain here any longer, regardless of how much rest that leg still requires." "Agreed," Alaric said, his jaw tight against the pain of Mira's careful ministrations. "We move toward Lady Wren's estate immediately, before Draven's men have the opportunity to regroup and return with reinforcements." Mira finished securing the bandage and sat back, studying Alaric's pale but determined expression, with a mixture of concern and reluctant admiration. "Your leg is not fully healed. Neither is this new wound. Traveling now carries significant risk. Remaining here carries greater risk," Alaric countered gently. "You fought remarkably well back there, by the way. That was quick thinking with the powder." Despite the exhaustion and lingering fear still coursing through her, Mira felt an unexpected flush of pride at his words. "I told you healers develop unconventional skills. Remind me never to underestimate your satchel of herbs again," Corwin added dryly, already beginning to gather their remaining supplies in preparation for immediate departure. The journey toward Lady Wren's estate began within the hour, all three of them moving with considerably more urgency and caution than their earlier travel, acutely aware that Draven's men now knew roughly where to search, and would almost certainly return with greater numbers once they regrouped from their failed assault. As they moved carefully through the forest, Mira found her thoughts returning repeatedly to the fight, to the strange, clear-headed determination that had carried her through those chaotic, terrifying moments. She had never imagined herself capable of striking another person, even in self-defense, and yet when the moment demanded it, some part of her had simply acted, driven by an instinct to protect not just herself, but the two men who had become, in the span of just a few short weeks, far more important to her than she had ever expected possible. Beside her, Alaric moved with obvious effort, his injured leg and new wound both clearly taking a toll despite his determination not to show weakness. Mira found herself watching him closely as they walked, torn between admiration for his quiet strength and growing worry about how much further he could push himself before the physical cost became too severe to ignore. "You do not have to prove anything to me," she said quietly, falling into step beside him as Corwin scouted slightly ahead. "I already know you are strong. You do not need to walk yourself into collapse to demonstrate it further." Alaric glanced at her, something softening in his expression despite the evident pain he was working to conceal. "It is not about proving strength," he said quietly. "It is about ensuring you and Corwin both reach safety, regardless of what it costs me personally. And if the cost is your own collapse before we even reach Lady Wren's estate, what good does that do either of us?" He was quiet for a long moment, considering her words seriously, rather than dismissing them outright as she half expected. "You make a fair point," he admitted finally. "I am simply unaccustomed to allowing others to shoulder burdens I have always considered entirely my own responsibility to carry. Perhaps that is something you should reconsider," Mira said gently. "Even kings, I imagine, benefit from allowing others to help carry the weight occasionally." Alaric's gold eyes met hers, warm despite the exhaustion and pain evident in his expression, and for a brief moment, the danger and urgency surrounding them seemed to fade into something quieter, more personal, a growing connection that neither of them had fully acknowledged aloud, despite its clear presence in every glance and careful word exchanged between them over these past difficult days. "Perhaps I should," he said softly, and the simple honesty in his admission carried a weight that felt, to Mira, considerably more significant than either of them was yet prepared to fully examine, especially with danger still very much pursuing them through the shadowed depths of the forest surrounding their path. They reached the outer boundary of Lady Wren's estate 2 days later, exhausted, travel-worn, and considerably more battered than when they had first fled the hidden shelter in the forest. The estate itself surprised Mira, who had expected something grand and imposing, befitting a member of the ruling council, but instead found a modest, elegant manor, surrounded by carefully tended gardens, hidden from casual view by a dense ring of ancient oak trees that seemed almost deliberately arranged to shield the property from prying eyes. "Lady Wren has always valued privacy," Corwin explained quietly, as they approached the manor's rear entrance, keeping to the shadows, despite the relative safety their journey had provided, compared to the danger surrounding the hidden shelter. "It is part of why I believe this location offered our best chance of reaching her, without alerting Draven's supporters." A servant met them at the entrance, an older woman whose eyes widened dramatically upon recognizing Alaric despite his travel-worn appearance, and within minutes, they found themselves ushered quickly into a private study, where a tall, silver-haired woman rose from behind an ornate desk, with an expression of profound shock and relief. "You are alive," Lady Wren said, her voice carrying genuine emotion, despite the careful, measured tone Mira imagined came naturally to someone accustomed to political maneuvering. "We feared the worst when you disappeared following the council meeting." "As Draven intended, I suspect," Alaric replied grimly, lowering himself carefully into the chair Lady Wren gestured toward, his exhaustion finally becoming fully visible now that immediate danger had temporarily receded. What followed was a long, careful conversation, during which Alaric explained everything that had happened since the attack, from his narrow escape through the forest, to his eventual recovery under Mira's unexpected care, and finally to the assault on their hidden shelter that had forced their journey toward Lady Wren's estate. Mira listened quietly from a chair near the study's window, watching the older woman's expression shift through shock, anger, and finally a hardening resolve that suggested whatever hesitation she had previously felt about openly opposing Draven had now fully dissolved. "Elder Bramwell will need to hear this as well," Lady Wren said finally, once Alaric had finished his account. "Together, our support, combined with proof that you survived Draven's attempt on your life, may be enough to sway several council members who have only pledged support to him out of fear rather than genuine loyalty. There is also the matter of the poison used during the attack," Alaric added. "If we can trace its origin, it may provide concrete evidence linking Draven directly to the assassination attempt, evidence that would be difficult for even his most committed supporters to dismiss." Lady Wren nodded slowly, already turning her attention toward practical matters of strategy and timing. As the discussion continued, delving into details of council politics and potential allies that Mira understood only partially, she found her attention drawn instead toward Alaric himself, noting the way his posture had shifted subtly since their arrival at the estate. Gone was the quiet, careful vulnerability she had grown accustomed to during their weeks together in hiding. In its place had emerged something sharper, more commanding, a natural authority in the way he spoke and carried himself that spoke clearly of the king he truly was, beneath the wounded, hunted man she had first nursed back to health. It was a strange thing to witness, this transformation from the Alaric she had come to know intimately during their quiet evenings by the fire, back into the powerful ruler whose decisions would soon determine the fate of an entire kingdom. Part of her felt an unexpected pang of loss at the shift, though she recognized the unfairness of such a feeling, even as it settled uncomfortably in her chest. That evening, after Lady Wren had arranged rooms for them within the manor, and the immediate urgency of their situation had finally allowed a measure of rest, Mira found herself standing alone on a small balcony overlooking the estate's gardens, lost in thoughts she was reluctant to fully examine. "You seem troubled," Alaric's voice came from behind her, quieter and more familiar than the commanding tone he had used throughout the afternoon's discussions. Mira turned to find him watching her with careful attention, his expression once again holding the gentleness she had grown to associate with the quiet evenings they had shared during their time in hiding. "I am simply adjusting," she said honestly, "to seeing you as you truly are, I suppose. The Alpha King, rather than the man I have come to know these past weeks." Something flickered across his face at her words, understanding mixed with a hint of concern. "I am still the same man," he said quietly, moving to stand beside her at the balcony railing. "The crown does not change who I am, only the responsibilities I must carry alongside it." "I know that, logically," Mira admitted, "but watching you today, commanding a room full of powerful council allies with such natural authority, it was difficult not to feel the distance between who you are and who I am. A village healer's apprentice, however skilled with herbs and bandages, is hardly equivalent to a king planning the future of an entire kingdom." Alaric was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a seriousness that surprised her. "Do you believe that distance matters to me?" "It should," Mira said softly. "Kings do not typically concern themselves with village healers, beyond perhaps gratitude for services rendered." "Then perhaps I am not a typical king," Alaric replied, turning to face her fully, his gold eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch unexpectedly. "Mira, these past weeks in your care taught me more about genuine connection than years spent surrounded by council members and advisors ever managed to provide. Your skill, your courage, the fact that you chose again and again to remain by my side, despite every reasonable excuse to walk away. None of that diminishes simply because I have returned to circumstances that require me to act as king, rather than simply as the man you helped heal." Mira's heart pounded at the sincerity in his words, at the warmth in his gaze that seemed to see past every doubt she had allowed herself to entertain. "Alaric," she began, uncertain exactly what she intended to say next. "I know our circumstances remain complicated," he continued, before she could finish, his voice growing quieter, more personal. "There is still a kingdom to reclaim, a traitor to expose, and considerable danger that has not yet passed. But I want you to understand that whatever role you choose to play in what comes next, whether simply as an ally who helped me survive, or as something considerably more significant, that choice belongs entirely to you. I will not presume otherwise, regardless of how deeply my own feelings on the matter have grown these past weeks." The quiet vulnerability in his admission, so different from the commanding authority he had displayed throughout the day's discussions, moved Mira more deeply than she had expected. She reached out, taking his hand in both of hers, feeling the slight tremor that ran through him at her touch. "I did not save a wounded wolf expecting any of this," she said softly, "but I do not regret a single moment of what has followed, difficult and dangerous as it has been. Whatever comes next, Alaric, I find that I want to remain part of it, not simply as your ally, but as someone who has come to care for you far more deeply than I ever anticipated when I first found you tangled in that terrible trap." Alaric's expression softened into something achingly tender, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke, simply standing together, beneath the gathering evening stars, the weight of unspoken feelings finally acknowledged between them, even as the larger dangers of their situation remained unresolved. "Then we face what comes next together," Alaric said finally, his voice carrying quiet certainty. "Whatever challenges Draven and his supporters still intend to throw against us." Behind them, the sound of the study door opening interrupted the moment, Corwin's voice calling quietly that Elder Bramwell's response had arrived, carrying news that would determine their next steps in the delicate, dangerous game of reclaiming Alaric's rightful place upon the throne. The moment of quiet tenderness passed, replaced once more by the urgent demands of their larger struggle, but something had shifted between them nonetheless, a bond solidified that neither danger nor distance would easily unravel, as they turned together to face whatever challenges still lay ahead. Elder Bramwell's message, when Alaric finally read it aloud in Lady Wren's private study, carried both hope and fresh urgency in equal measure. "He confirms his support," Alaric said, scanning the carefully worded letter with visible relief. "He also warns that Draven has scheduled a formal ceremony 3 days from now, intending to have himself declared regent in my continued absence, a first step toward permanently seizing the throne." 3 days, Lady Wren repeated, her expression tightening with concern. That does not leave us much time to organize sufficient support to challenge him openly. It leaves us enough time, Alaric said, determination hardening his voice, provided we move carefully and decisively. Elder Bramwell's support, combined with your own, Lady Wren, may be sufficient to convince the wavering council members to reconsider their allegiance, particularly once they see with their own eyes that I remain very much alive. Mira listened to the exchange with growing unease, aware that whatever plan emerged from this discussion would likely require returning directly into the heart of danger they had spent weeks carefully avoiding. What exactly are you proposing? She asked. A direct appearance before the full council, Alaric said, timed precisely to disrupt Draven's ceremony before he can complete whatever declaration he intends to make. If I appear publicly, with Lady Wren and Elder Bramwell standing openly in support, Draven will find it considerably more difficult to maintain his claim of regency, particularly with evidence of his betrayal now available to present. You mean the poison? Corwin said, understanding immediately. Have we confirmed its origin? I have, Lady Wren said, moving to retrieve a small sealed vial from a locked cabinet within her study. One of my own household staff maintains connections within Draven's estate. She managed to obtain a sample matching the substance used during the attack, along with correspondence suggesting Draven personally ordered its acquisition, weeks before the council meeting where it was ultimately deployed. The revelation settled heavily over the room. Concrete evidence, finally, linking Draven directly to the assassination attempt, evidence that would be difficult for even his most loyal supporters to simply dismiss or explain away. This changes everything, Alaric said, examining the vial and accompanying documents with visible relief. With this evidence, combined with our public appearance disrupting his ceremony, Draven's position becomes considerably more precarious. It also becomes considerably more dangerous for all of us, Corwin pointed out grimly. Draven will not simply accept exposure without a fight. If we appear at the ceremony with this evidence, we should expect him to respond with whatever force remains at his disposal. Alaric's expression grew serious as he considered this warning. Then we ensure we do not arrive unprepared. Lady Wren, how many of the council guard remain loyal to the crown, rather than to Draven's personal authority? Perhaps a third of the total guard force, Lady Wren estimated carefully. Enough to provide meaningful protection, though not enough to guarantee victory, should Draven choose to escalate matters through open conflict, rather than political maneuvering. The planning continued late into the evening, details refined, and contingencies discussed as thoroughly as their limited time allowed. Mira found herself increasingly drawn into these discussions, offering practical suggestions regarding logistics and timing that surprised even herself with their usefulness, though she remained acutely aware of the growing danger that awaited them at the heart of the ceremony they intended to disrupt. 2 days later, as their small group prepared to depart Lady Wren's estate for the final approach toward the capital, Mira found herself standing beside Alaric in the quiet pre-dawn light, both of them dressed now in clothing more befitting the seriousness of their mission than the simple traveling garments they had relied upon throughout their weeks in hiding. "Are you ready for this?" Alaric asked quietly, studying her expression with obvious concern. "As ready as I can be, given the circumstances," Mira admitted. "I have never stood before a room full of powerful council members, intent on seizing an entire kingdom through treachery and violence. I imagine there is no amount of preparation that fully accounts for that particular experience. You do not have to accompany us into the council chamber itself," Alaric said gently. "Remaining with Lady Wren's household guard, away from the most immediate danger, would be entirely understandable." Mira shook her head firmly. "I have come this far. I do not intend to remain behind now. Not when the outcome of everything we have worked toward finally hangs in the balance." Something in her determined expression seemed to settle whatever lingering concern remained in Alaric's own mind, and he nodded slowly, accepting her decision without further argument. "Then let us finish what began in that forest weeks ago," he said, and together they moved to join Corwin and Lady Wren's small contingent of loyal guards, beginning the final leg of their journey toward the capital, where Draven's ceremony awaited. The journey to the capital proved tense but uneventful, their careful timing and Lady Wren's discreet arrangements allowing them to avoid detection by Draven's remaining patrols along the main roads. By the time they arrived at the outskirts of the capital city, the ceremony scheduled to declare Draven regent was mere hours away, and the careful, coordinated plan they had developed over the preceding days now faced its true test. The Capitol itself surprised Mira with its scale and beauty, structures built with an elegant blend of natural materials and careful craftsmanship that suggested generations of peaceful prosperity, now threatened by the ambitions of a single power-hungry council member. Lady Wren guided them through quieter back passages toward the council chambers, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Draven's supporters had gathered in preparation for the ceremony. The chamber entrance ahead leads directly behind the main dais, Lady Wren explained quietly, as they approached a modest side entrance, guarded by two figures, whose posture immediately relaxed upon recognizing her. Elder Bramwell has arranged for these guards to allow our passage. From here, timing becomes critical. We need to enter at precisely the moment Draven begins his formal declaration, when the assembled council and witnesses will be most attentive and least prepared for interruption. Alaric nodded grimly, checking the small satchel containing Lady Wren's evidence one final time. Corwin, you remain with Mira near the chamber's edge until the moment is right. I will approach the dais directly alongside Lady Wren, presenting the evidence before Draven has the opportunity to complete his declaration. And if he attempts violence rather than simply accepting exposure? Corwin asked, his expression tight with concern. Then we respond accordingly, Alaric said grimly. But I am hoping the presence of concrete evidence, combined with Lady Wren and Elder Bramwell's open support, will be sufficient to sway the assembled council before matters escalate that far. They moved carefully through the side passage, the muffled sound of a large gathered crowd growing steadily louder as they approached the main council chamber. Mira's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and fierce determination as she caught her first glimpse through a narrow gap in the chamber's side entrance, revealing a vast, ornate space filled with council members, guards, and assembled citizens, all focused intently on a raised dais, where a tall, imposing figure stood, addressing the crowd with confident, commanding authority. Draven, she realized immediately, recognizing the man from Alaric's earlier descriptions. Even from a distance, something about his bearing radiated a cold, calculating ambition that made her skin prickle with instinctive unease. And so, in the continued absence of any confirmation regarding our king's fate, Draven was saying, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's careful acoustics, the responsibility falls to this council to ensure the kingdom's continued stability. I propose, therefore, that this body formally declare a regency, effective immediately, until such time as what, precisely? Alaric's voice cut through the chamber with startling clarity, and Mira watched with fierce pride as he stepped fully into view, moving with confident, commanding strides, directly toward the dais, where Draven stood frozen in visible shock. The chamber erupted into stunned murmurs and gasps as the assembled crowd registered the presence of their supposedly deceased king, very much alive and moving with unmistakable authority through their midst. Draven's expression cycled rapidly through shock, calculation, and finally a carefully controlled mask of relief that did not fully mask the fury simmering beneath his eyes. "Your Majesty," Draven said, his voice carrying just the right note of surprised joy for the benefit of the watching crowd. "We feared the worst, following your disappearance. This is truly wonderful news." "Is it?" Alaric replied coldly, mounting the dais steps with Lady Wren close behind him, "considering the poison used to weaken this very chamber's occupants during the meeting from which I disappeared originated, according to confirmed evidence, from your own personal household." A collective gasp rippled through the assembled council members, and Draven's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, fury flashing openly across his features before he could fully suppress it. "Lies," he snapped, though his voice carried considerably less confidence than moments before. "Fabricated accusations meant to discredit my leadership during a period of legitimate crisis." "Fabricated?" Lady Wren stepped forward, producing the sealed vial and accompanying documents for the assembled council to witness. "This evidence, along with sworn testimony from your own household staff, confirms your direct involvement in acquiring and deploying the poison used against our king. I would suggest, Draven, that further denial serves only to further damage whatever remaining credibility you possess within this chamber." The council chamber descended into chaos, voices rising in shock and outrage as the full implications of the evidence settled over the gathered assembly. Mira watched from her position near the side entrance, heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce hope, as she saw several council members who had previously pledged support to Draven now shifting visibly away from him, their expressions hardening with betrayal and disgust. But Draven, cornered and desperate, was not yet finished. "Guards," he shouted suddenly, his voice cutting sharply through the chaos. "Seize the traitor and his conspirators immediately." For a tense, uncertain moment, nothing happened. The assembled guards clearly uncertain whose authority truly commanded their loyalty in this suddenly chaotic situation. Then, from the chamber's edges, a significant contingent of armed figures began moving forward, clearly still loyal to Draven's command, despite the damning evidence just presented against him. "This is not over," Alaric said grimly, drawing the small dagger Corwin had provided him weeks earlier, his stance shifting immediately into a defensive posture, despite his still healing leg. Mira felt Corwin's hand close firmly around her arm, pulling her back from the chamber entrance even as chaos erupted fully within the vast space beyond. The confrontation they had all feared, finally breaking out in the most public and consequential setting imaginable, with the entire fate of the kingdom now hanging precariously in the balance of whatever violent struggle was about to unfold. The council chamber descended into complete chaos as Draven's loyal guards pushed forward, steel ringing against steel, as those still faithful to Alaric's crown moved swiftly to intercept them. Mira watched in horror from the side entrance, as the confrontation she had feared for weeks finally erupted in full view of the entire assembled council and citizenry. "We cannot simply stand here," she said urgently to Corwin, who still held her arm in a protective grip. "Alaric specifically instructed us to remain here," Corwin replied. Though his own expression betrayed the same reluctant frustration, Mira felt it watching from the sidelines, while danger closed in around the man they had both come to care for so deeply. On the dais, Alaric moved with fierce, controlled precision, despite his still healing leg, disarming one attacker, before turning immediately to face Draven himself, who had drawn a concealed blade from beneath his ceremonial robes, with the swift, practiced motion of a man who had clearly anticipated this confrontation might eventually become necessary. "You should have stayed dead," Draven snarled, lunging forward with surprising speed for a man of his considerable age. Alaric parried the strike with practiced ease, though Mira could see the strain evident in his movements, his injured leg clearly limiting his usual agility despite weeks of careful healing. "And you should have remained satisfied with your position on the council," he replied, rather than allowing ambition to drive you toward treason and attempted murder. The two men exchanged several more rapid strikes, the surrounding chaos of the larger confrontation fading into background noise, as Mira's entire attention narrowed to the desperate duel unfolding atop the dais. Draven fought with the cold, calculating precision of someone who had spent years planning for exactly this confrontation, while Alaric, despite his injury, matched him with the natural authority and skill befitting a king who had spent his entire life training for the responsibility he now carried. It was Elder Bramwell's sudden arrival, leading a substantial contingent of loyal guards through the chamber's main entrance, that finally began tipping the larger confrontation decisively in Alaric's favor. Draven's remaining supporters, seeing their numbers now significantly outmatched and their leader's treachery openly exposed before the entire council, began throwing down their weapons in rapid succession, recognizing the futility of continuing their doomed defense. Draven alone continued fighting, his desperation growing evident as his careful plans collapsed entirely around him. Mira watched, heart in her throat, as Alaric pressed his advantage, finally disarming his opponent with a swift, decisive strike that sent Draven's blade clattering uselessly across the dais floor. "It is finished, Draven," Alaric said, his voice carrying clearly through the now considerably quieter chamber, his own blade held steady, despite his evident exhaustion. "Your treason stands exposed before this entire council. Surrender now, and perhaps some measure of mercy remains possible." For a long, tense moment, Draven remained frozen, calculating expressions cycling through options that had clearly all evaporated entirely. Finally, his shoulders sagged in defeat, and he sank slowly to his knees upon the dais, the fight fully drained from his posture. "Take him into custody," Alaric commanded, and several of the loyal guards moved quickly to secure the defeated traitor, leading him away from the dais amid the stunned silence of the watching council. Only then did Mira feel Corwin's grip on her arm finally relax, and she rushed forward without further hesitation, pushing through the dispersing chaos, toward the dais where Alaric stood, breathing heavily, his injured leg finally beginning to visibly buckle now that the immediate danger had passed. "You need to sit down before you collapse entirely," she said firmly, reaching him just in time to help steady him as exhaustion and pain finally caught up with the adrenaline that had carried him through the confrontation. "I believe you may be right," Alaric admitted, allowing her to guide him toward a chair Lady Wren quickly provided, his relief evident despite the pain clearly written across his features. As Mira knelt immediately to examine his leg, confirming with relief that the wound had not reopened despite the strain of battle, the assembled council began settling into stunned, murmuring recognition of everything that had just unfolded before them. Elder Bramwell moved to address the chamber directly, his authoritative voice cutting through the remaining confusion. "Let it be recorded," he announced, "that Draven's treason against the crown stands fully exposed and confirmed through concrete evidence and open confession. Our rightful king, Alaric, survived a cowardly assassination attempt and has returned to reclaim his throne, exposing the very traitor who sought to seize it through poison and deception." A wave of applause and relieved cheering rippled through the chamber, council members and citizens alike expressing their support now that the truth had been so thoroughly and publicly established. Mira, still kneeling beside Alaric's chair, felt tears of relief prickling unexpectedly at her eyes as the full weight of everything they had endured over the preceding weeks finally began settling into something resembling resolution. "You did it," she said softly, looking up at Alaric with fierce pride evident in her expression. "We did it," he corrected gently, reaching down to take her hand in his own. "None of this would have been possible without your care, your courage, and your unwavering support throughout everything that has happened since that day in the forest." In the days that followed, the kingdom began the slow, careful process of healing from the crisis Draven's ambition had nearly caused. Council members who had wavered in their loyalty during the uncertainty of Alaric's absence worked diligently to rebuild trust, while those who had actively supported Draven's treachery faced appropriate consequences for their betrayal. Mira found herself increasingly drawn into the rhythms of court life, her practical skills and quiet wisdom earning genuine respect among council members, who had initially regarded her with understandable curiosity, given her unusual origins as a simple village healer's apprentice. Agatha, when word eventually reached her regarding her former apprentice's remarkable adventures, sent a message that combined equal parts pride and gentle exasperation at having lost such a promising student to the demands of kingdom politics. It was nearly a month after Draven's defeat, during a formal court ceremony celebrating the kingdom's restored stability, that Alaric finally addressed the full assembled council and citizenry regarding a matter he had been carefully considering since the moment their dangerous journey together had first begun. "Throughout the crisis that recently threatened our kingdom's stability," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the grand hall, now filled with citizens eager to witness the ceremony marking their restored peace, "I found myself saved, protected, and ultimately guided toward victory by someone whose courage and wisdom proved every bit as valuable as any trained soldier or seasoned advisor within this court." Mira, standing near the front of the assembled crowd, felt her cheeks flush as Alaric's gold eyes found hers directly across the vast hall, his expression carrying a warmth and certainty that made her breath catch with anticipation. "Mira of the village healers," Alaric continued, extending his hand toward her as she moved forward, drawn by the quiet command in his gaze, "found me broken and near death in a poacher's trap, offering care and shelter without any knowledge of who or what I truly was. She stood beside me through danger, deception, and finally through the confrontation that restored proper order to this kingdom, never once wavering in her courage or her compassion, despite every reasonable excuse to abandon a path that offered her nothing but risk." The assembled crowd fell into hushed, attentive silence as Mira reached the dais, her heart pounding as she took Alaric's outstretched hand, uncertain exactly what declaration he intended to make but sensing, from the depth of emotion evident in his expression, that whatever followed would change the entire course of her life once again. "I do not simply wish to honor her contributions with words alone," Alaric said, turning to address the crowd directly, while still holding Mira's hand firmly in his own. "I wish to ask her, before this entire kingdom, whether she would consent to stand beside me, not merely as an ally who helped restore my throne, but as my chosen mate, and as this kingdom's future queen." The hall erupted into astonished murmurs, but Mira barely registered the sound, her entire attention fixed on Alaric's gold eyes, filled with a hopeful vulnerability that reminded her powerfully of the wounded wolf she had first encountered tangled helplessly in a poacher's snare, weeks and an entire lifetime ago. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying clearly, despite the emotion thickening her throat. "I would be honored to stand beside you, Alaric, for whatever challenges and joys the future holds for both of us." The hall exploded into genuine, joyful celebration, the assembled citizens and council members alike, embracing the news with an enthusiasm that spoke clearly of how thoroughly Mira's courage and kindness had already won their respect during the preceding weeks of crisis. Alaric drew her close, his relief and happiness evident in every line of his expression, as he pressed a gentle, promising kiss to her forehead amid the celebrating crowd. "From a clumsy rescue in a forgotten corner of the forest," he murmured softly, just for her to hear, amid the surrounding celebration. "To a future neither of us could have possibly imagined, when you first knelt beside a wounded, frightened wolf, and chose compassion over fear." Mira smiled up at him, her heart full with a happiness that felt both impossibly unexpected and entirely, perfectly right. "I suppose sometimes the most extraordinary futures begin with the smallest, clumsiest acts of kindness," she said softly. And as the kingdom celebrated around them, the darkness of Draven's betrayal finally giving way to hope and renewed stability, Mira understood with complete certainty that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them exactly as she had faced everything since that fateful day in the Forbidden Woods. With courage, compassion, and the steady, unwavering support of the remarkable man whose life she had saved, and who had, in turn, given her a future far richer and more meaningful than she had ever dared to imagine for herself.